All right, ladies, gentlemen, thank you all for joining us. We are going to begin the program. So it is my honor to welcome all of you to the third International Ismaili Studies Conference taking place online via Zoom. My name is Khalil Andani. I'm an assistant professor of religion at Augustana College. I am one of the co-conveners of our conference. This year's Ismaili Studies Conference is being hosted by the Leiden University Shi'i Studies Initiative, which is the main sponsor for this entire 5-day event. So we're very, very thankful to Leiden for coming on board with us. Just so everybody knows, this conference is happening. This conference is happening on Zoom. The conference is also being live streamed on YouTube. There's a different link for every day. If you registered for the Zoom session, you will have been emailed the YouTube links as well. So I'm going to give the opening remarks, and it's my honor to do so. And right after opening remarks, which will end in about half an hour, we will go right to panel one. I just ask everyone that, keeping in mind that this is an online event, there are bound to be certain hiccups in technology. It's possible my internet cuts out for a few seconds. That's okay if that happens. I'll just come right back in, and same goes for everybody else. So let me begin by offering a word of thanks to all the people who've been working hard behind the scenes and in front of the scenes to make this conference happen. So Dr. Ahab Badawi is the co-convener of this conference, and he's the head of the Leiden University Shi'i Studies Initiative. We're thankful to him. We also have an entire organizing committee: Dr. Daniel Beban, Dr. Ali Asghar Alibai, Dr. Alicia Cummins, and Sayed Zaidi. They have been the organizing committee, who've been working behind the scenes to make all this happen for you. So a big vote of thanks to the conference committee. I also want to extend a thank you to the person who sort of helped start the Ismaili Studies Conference as an institution. That would be Dr. Shiraz Hajiani. So this is the third Ismaili Studies Conference. The first Ismaili Studies Conference took place in 2014 at the University of Chicago. And it was done by Dr. Shiraz Hajiani and Dr. Michael Bechtel back then. And the Ismaili Studies Conference is actually an autonomous institution. It's not owned by anybody. And therefore, the second Ismaili Studies Conference took place in 2017 by Dr. Karim H. Karim, Professor Karim H. Karim at Carleton University, and that was 2017. And this time we came along and we've done the third one, obviously in the midst of a pandemic. And I just want to acknowledge that although the pandemic has exposed a whole number of inequities, and there are some academic practices that have made things more equitable, like online conferences, I do want to acknowledge that the pandemic has brought an immense amount of pain and suffering upon, millions, billions of people around the world. So while some of us may be participating here and privileged to do so, there are others for whom life is extremely difficult right now, and I want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge the behind the scenes help of Professor Karim H. Karim, who will be giving the keynote later today, and he's also been guiding our committee and best practices on how to put together an Ismaili Studies conference. So a special thanks to him. This conference has brought many scholars together, especially senior scholars, during a time when many academics are balancing childcare and other obligations. So a big thank you to all our participants, all our speakers, whether in panels or roundtables. All of these people have taken time out of important tasks to contribute to this conference. So a big thank you to our conference speakers whom we'll be hearing from over the next few days. Again, keep in mind that this is a 5-day conference. Today is day 1, and we go until the end of the day on Tuesday. I encourage anyone to use the hashtag here and tweet on Facebook or Twitter as you see fit. All right, so it was my task to give the opening remarks, and that's always tough, but because you know, you don't want to put people to sleep, and yet you have to open the entire conference. So every opening remarks is sort of has the flavor of the conference organizer. So this is basically my chance to put out there before this conference certain thoughts that I think are important. And I'm also going to assume, given our audience, and we have 1,000 registered for this conference, there's about 100 in the audience right now. Most of our audience are non-academics, and that's completely fine. This conference is a public endeavor in a sense. So what I'd like to do is share a few thoughts with you, assuming the non-academic nature of our audience, which I hope will sort of set the stage for what is going to follow over the next 5 days. And again, these are sort of my reflections as a scholar of Ismaili studies, a younger generation scholar, that is. And people can sort of take it or leave it, depending on what you think. But just for some background, why is Ismaili studies important? Why do we have an Ismaili studies conference? Why is the academic study of the Ismaili tradition of any importance? So many decades ago, the major scholar of Islamic studies, Sayyid Hussein Nasr, wrote in a volume that he edited, quote, "There is hardly an aspect of the Islamic community, especially in its early period, that was not touched in one way or another by the presence of Ismailism." So this is an interesting quote. It comes, you know, back in 1977. Now, I think that for us to even realize and actualize what is being said here, that almost every aspect of Islamic civilization has been touched by Ismailism, the only way we could truly know about this is if we actually study the phenomena called Ismailism in an academic way. Now, the academic study of the Ismaili tradition, what is today called Ismaili studies, emerged, compared to the rest of Islamic studies, emerged quite late. Prior to really the 1920s. So if you go back 100 years ago, right, the 1920s, and then just right before that, the study of Islam in modern academia was done primarily using sources that prioritized Sunni Muslim historical and theological narratives. This is just how it was done. Now, there were many reasons why it was done. The project of the academic study of Islam in its inception was very much linked to colonialism. You just have to look up the intellectual and you know, political background of many early Islamic studies academics, and you'll find that they all have colonialist ties. They might be civilians working for the military and this sort of thing. So that context of the academic study of Islam was originally quite colonialist. It was somewhat, not totally, but somewhat in service of the colonialist project by the British, the Germans, the French, the Dutch, and so on. So therefore, many of these early Islamic studies academics, which we call Orientalists from today's perspective, they researched the Ismailis based on hundreds of years of anti-Ismaili polemic, that is anti-Ismaili messaging that had been put out by the enemies of the Ismailis with the purpose of tarnishing the Ismailis historically and theologically. So the scholarship in the 1800s is very much based on this. You know, works by von Hammer, for example, are not really academic, but they're just spreading myths about the Ismailis. And this was the case for many, many decades. And it's actually beginning around the 1920s where you have the first generation of what you could call modern Ismaili studies scholars. And I'm just going to sort of put their name on the slide over here. So names like Semenov, Louis Massignon, Ivanov, who's quite notable in this, Faizi, Zahid Ali, Hamdani, Hussein. These types of scholars are the first generation who really create modern Ismaili studies. And as you can see here, the names, if you're familiar, many of these scholars are Russian, they're European, they're French, and they're actually Dawoodi Bohra scholars. Zahid Ali, Hamdani, and Faizi are from the Dawoodi Bohra community. So you see this, the emergence, the genesis of modern Ismaili studies is a collaborative effort from people within and outside formal Ismaili communities. And then the second generation of these scholars include the likes of Henry Corbin and Stern, Arif Tamer, who's from the Muhammad Shahi Nizari community, and Marshall Hodgson, to name a few. So this was the origin of this. And the main difference between modern Ismaili studies and what went before modern Ismaili studies is simply that these modern Ismaili studies scholars are actually using primary sources from Ismaili communities, which were starting to be discovered in manuscript form in the 1920s and shortly before that. So sources is a huge deal when it comes to the academic study of anything. You have to have a balance of primary sources that are, within the tradition and without the tradition. So that was the big change. And from this time, from the 1930s, the entire field of Ismaili studies has taken off. It has flourished. It's not at the level of other subforms of Islam, but it is much better than it was originally. This has been in large part to academic research institutions established by Sir Sultan Muhammad Shah, the 48th Imam of the Nizari Ismailis in the 1930s and 40s. Institutions like the Ismaili Society, which was patronized by the Ismaili Imam. And later in 1977, His Highness Imam Shah Karim al-Husseini Aga Khan IV, who established the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London, located today at the Aga Khan Center. And due to these efforts and due to many independent scholars who frankly have risked a life of poverty, they decided to pursue Ismaili studies. So there's many more names I could mention, but due to several generations of these scholars, we can now enjoy an actual subfield of modern Ismaili studies, whose sort of manifestation in some sense is the immensely great library collection of the Institute of Ismaili Studies, which is today located at the Aga Khan Library in London. So we're very thankful to all these endeavors that have been made over the 20th century. That's why we can have an Ismaili Studies conference in the present day. There is an actual field called Ismaili Studies. Not only that, at certain universities like the University of Toronto with Professor Shafiq Virani, Harvard University, Professor Ali Asani, there are now entire courses called Ismaili History and Thought, where grad students and undergrad students in seminar form can focus on the academic study of the Ismaili traditions. So we've come a very long way in a short time. Now, this idea of Ismaili studies and the academic study of Islam in general sometimes causes some confusion amongst people who are not part of this field, formally speaking. So what I'm going to share with you now, it is somewhat for our audience. Those who are on the panel will be familiar with this. But from an audience perspective, most of our audience are going to be community members, people from the Bohra or Nizari Ismaili communities. And people in these communities actually are quite interested in modern Ismaili studies. To help people think about this, I want to distinguish, and this is important for what's going to happen at the conference, but I want to distinguish between two forms of Ismaili studies today, modern Ismaili studies. These would be the academic and the constructive forms. So what do we mean by that? So let me begin by just briefly talking about the academic or descriptive study of Islam, which would apply to Ismaili studies as well. So as an example, if someone, and I'm just going to say the name because someone's actually done this. So Professor Paul Walker, who's one of our conference participants, he has written 2 books. He has written at least 2 studies about Sijistani's understanding of intellect. So those are examples, and most of what we have in modern Ismaili studies are what you call academic and descriptive studies of Islam. This is a study about what Ismailis or people in the Ismaili tradition have believed and thought about and done, okay? The academic study is descriptive. It is committed to methodological naturalism. So I'm saying this because the academic study of Ismaili traditions does not make faith-based or theological claims about what is ultimately true and what is ultimately false. The academic study is about describing certain phenomena. It's about describing what people think, what people believe, what people do, how people behave. And it's about using historical, cultural, and socio-political contexts to better understand how and why human beings, in this case, Ismaili Muslims, are creating meaning in the way they do, right? This is part of the academic descriptive study of Ismailism, for example. And it's very much a historically based endeavor. So again, the academic study, and most of what you have in Ismaili studies falls under this. It takes more or less a secular perspective towards the study of Ismailism. It does not assume the theologies of Ismailism are true, nor does it assume that they are false. It just tries to describe them. And this is what most people are familiar with when we say modern Ismaili studies. Now, there is another way to do Ismaili studies, which is actually more historical and is technically not academic, but it is another kind of Ismaili studies. And this is what you would call the theological or constructive study of Islam. And if I go back to my earlier example, if I, or if Dr. Paul Walker, because he's actually done this, if he writes a book about Sijistani's understanding of intellect, that would be an academic descriptive study. But when Sijistani himself in the 900s, when he writes a whole treatise putting forward his own understanding and his own arguments of what the intellect is, Sijistani is not being an academic here. Sijistani is being a theologian. He is doing what we call constructive work, right? He's actually formulating and arguing for a truth claim. So this is another type of Ismaili studies. In fact, most of the primary sources that academics study today, most of those primary sources are done by Ismailis themselves, and those primary sources in and of themselves fall under the constructive study of Islam and Ismailism. So in the constructive or the theological approach, you actually make truth claims. You do pay attention to context, but what you're more interested in is attention to timeless, universal, unchanging truths. In the academic study, you describe many interpretations of the same idea, and you don't judge which interpretation is true. But in the theological and constructive study, you actually emphasize the normativity of one interpretation of the religious tradition, namely your own. So that's the difference between these two forms of Ismaili studies. So in the past, before academia was created, the Ismailis who are within their tradition, when they write, when they lecture, they are coming from a theological and constructive point of view. They're actually constructing Ismaili thought in the pre-modern Ismailis. Modern day academics are describing Ismaili thought. They're not constructing Ismaili thought. That's a very key difference that we need to be aware of. Now, why is this important? Well, today, if you look at a literature, a catalog of Ismaili bibliography, you will find tons of work on academic and descriptive studies in Ismaili studies, tons of work, and it's done really, really well. However, if you look today, if you look in the 20th and 21st century, will you find new, not old, will you find new and current theological and constructive studies of Ismaili Islam? You actually will find very little on that. And this has been noted by modern scholars. So the question I'm posing is, today, how much constructive theological Ismaili thought will we find? What has happened to that constructive Ismaili philosophical, theological, and exegetical tradition? So back in 1974, Henry Corbin made a note of this. He said, and I quote, "The Ismailism which during the 10th and 11th centuries of our era pioneered the most daring metaphysical thought in Islam has almost withdrawn into silence over the last centuries. Its voice, at once original and traditional, should be heard again today, a task of which it seems that the young Ismailis are aware." So this is Henry Corbin in 1974, basically asking, where is the Ismaili metaphysics of the 20th century, of modern times? Where is the Ismaili philosophy? Where is the Ismaili cosmology? He's saying that it's withdrawn into silence and that it needs to be heard again. Again, what he's not talking about the modern academic study, which describes what Ismailis have done. He's talking about an act, an intellectual endeavor by Ismailis themselves, where they actually create and make meaning in the context of their own tradition. That is what seems to be missing today. That was 1974. Forward, 40 years later, Faisal Devji in 2014 says the same thing. So things haven't changed over those 40 years. He says that apart from the exegesis of medieval texts and a few very recent philosophical and anthropological studies, there is almost no work on Ismailism as a form of thought. I stress this fact because as a small minority in the world of Islam, it is precisely as a form of thought that Ismailism has historically been important. So this is 2014. So this has been a concern of mine personally. I'm in the academic field of Ismaili studies, and it's very interesting to study the past. But should we be studying the past as a museum? Or can the past also be appreciated by, current day Ismaili community members as part of their own living tradition? This is not a question that qua academics can answer. It is an answer that can come from, the Ismaili communities themselves. But one thing we've done at this conference, we have tried to create a space where there will be a forum for the academic study of Ismailism and the constructive study of Ismailism. We have allowed this conference to be open to both. So let me give you an example of these. So when it comes to academic Ismaili studies, and most of the conference is going to be presentations that take an academic descriptive approach. So our first panel today, which is going to start in a few minutes, this first panel, which you'll hear from, is a textbook case of academic descriptive Ismaili studies. And this is what those of us in academia, this is our bread and butter. This is the sort of thing that we do. So panel one is that. But there are going to be other panels, a few other panels that will take this other constructivist approach to Ismaili studies, where our speakers are not just going to be describing what Ismailis thought in the 13th century, but they are going to be offering new interpretations today from an Ismaili theological or metaphysical perspective. So panel 10, which is happening on Sunday, is one example where all three presentations are taking a constructive theological approach to the Ismaili tradition, where new ideas will be proposed, new theologies, new metaphysics, and the application today of older principles. So I just want our audience to be aware of this. To be honest, most people in Ismaili studies stick to the academic descriptive approach, and that's fine because that's what the whole field is based on. But at the same time, it is important, not just for Ismaili communities, but it's also important in wider intellectual discourse that Ismailis today of various traditions engage in constructive thought. And I'm saying this because as the world evolves, we do have fields in other academic areas, such as the philosophy of religion, where Christians of different traditions, and now Sunni Muslims are engaging in constructive thought. We just had a prior conference on this last month on philosophy of religion. So Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Christians are now engaging in constructive thought. They're producing new ideas for their own traditions. So this is something that I personally would encourage people to do if they're interested in it. But this conference is a space for both the academic and the constructive endeavors, and I hope that will be enjoyable and valuable to all of you. So let me, so I'm close to ending our opening remarks now. Let me end with just a couple of things. So this conference, the Ismaili Studies Conference as an institution, this conference is an independent intellectual space, and it is a pluralist space. So we are not censoring any speaker who's presenting here. We have given complete intellectual autonomy and respect to all speakers. And I hope everyone in the audience, respects this, right? We're not here to promote, there's no ideology or theology or metaphysics or any of this sort that is being promoted by this conference. This conference is very much about open-ended academic and constructive inquiry. We value the diversity and plurality of thought. We value people's honest input. So for questions throughout the panels, I encourage people to use the Q&A box. This is for the audience. Use the Q&A box to answer questions. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can from you. The chat box is only going to be open to panelists, basically, right? There's already a question actually from one of my panelists. Someone said, how can we bridge over these two independent fields, academic and constructive? I think that's a very good question. I think we're not even at the stage to talk about the bridge until there actually is a constructive field, which quite frankly doesn't really exist yet, but maybe one day we can think about that. We can also go back to many of these thoughts I've shared when we'll go to the round table, where I think some scholars might have a different take than what I've provided, and that's completely fine. So just to remember, on the last day, August 10th, there is a round table, and we have many senior scholars of Ismaili studies participating in that round table on August 10th. Also on August 10th, the Roseman and Karim prize is also going to be announced on the morning of August 10th. So there's a lot going on in this conference. And keep in mind that if you fall behind, the YouTube link is recording and streaming this entire thing. So before we get to panel one, let me just share one thing. And again, this is keeping in mind that many of our audience are community members from Ismaili communities, particularly the Nizari community. So some words of inspiration for those of the Nizari Ismaili community. Sort of like, why does Ismaili studies matter today? Why should we take an interest in this? So this is a quote from the interview of Imam Shah Karim al-Husseini Aga Khan IV that he gave in the Expresso magazine in Lisbon just 2-3 years ago. And this is what he said. He was asked about why he was interested in history. And this is what he said, and I quote, "We've already done a lot of work in the field of history because we want to make sure that we understand the evolution of Ismaili thought in the past. It is a religion of the brain, a religion of the mind. It is not just a religion of the soul. It is a faith of reason. And so we want to try to make sure that the philosophies of the past are well understood and can have adequate space in modern life. There's a whole context because it is a historical religion. We have an accumulation of history that is very important and extremely pluralistic. It was formed from various parts of the world and from different languages. And today, all these communities are, in a certain sense, united in a single light with different creeds, and these creeds are filling gaps in these countries where the gaps are not filled economically." So you see, the modern Ismaili studies, it's not just important for academics, although we sort of make a living on this. It's not just important for academics. It is also important for members of Ismaili communities as well. Right? This is going to be a mechanism by which people within Ismaili communities are going to discover and rediscover their own intellectual, devotional, and spiritual heritage.